In this lesson, we're going to discuss how to overcome the issue of getting reflections in clear objects. Okay, so I have a piece of packaging here that I want to go ahead and just render into our picture viewer because I want to go ahead and show you kind of what not to do with this material. So you might start out by creating a material that you're trying to get a particular part of that material to show up in areas of your geometry that maybe are kind of ill-defined. So this is a perfect example. I have this piece of packaging here with this sort of extruded bubble piece that the light bulb goes inside of, and so I'm trying to define that with reflections and specular highlights here on the edge, but it's still just not quite doing the trick, and I've got this weird cloudiness to the material and it just doesn't look that good. So I'm going to show you a couple of ways that you can address this problem in your own renders. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So first of all, we've got this material right here. I'm going to double click that to open it, and let's zoom in a little bit closer here so you can sort of see what this is looking like, and we'll just move our picture, our interactive render region over there. Okay, so too much going on here with this cloudiness. We want to get rid of that. And really that's a very simple thing, is that you cannot try to define a clear object by turning on the color. That really, unless you want it to have some sort of a cloudiness to it, you don't need color in the equation. So just uncheck that and only deal with your transparency and your reflection. Those are going to be your keys here. So right now my transparency is turned up almost to 100%. So if I had it turned all the way up to 100, it would basically completely disappear except for very subtle specular here. This area where we were trying to get some definition for that shrink wrap bubble has completely disappeared, and this looks very strange. So you don't want that happening. You don't want to have this really cranked up so high that you're losing everything inside, because this is overriding some of those other things. So you'll want to turn this down a little bit, and the amount that you have this turned down is going to be the amount that the reflection shows through. So too much, and this is going to start to look like metal or a mirror. So you don't want it to go too low either. So usually I find that for something like this, plastic like this, 96% brightness on your transparency is just about right. And then you can also maybe increase your refraction a little bit. So if you don't have refraction turned on, if that was just at 1, for plastic like this, just adding a very tiny amount, just 0.001, really helped over here on the corners, just to make that feel like it's got a little bit more happening, a little bit more distortion through that plastic, which helps to show you that this is here. There is something here that is altering the light that's passing through it, and therefore the image that we're seeing. Now we've also got our reflection, which right now my reflections are turned up to 100% brightness, and you don't have to go that bright with them. You can choose to turn those down a little bit, but the more you turn those down, the less obvious they're going to be, and the less you're going to be able to see the outline here. So it really is kind of a balance of getting enough reflection. Also, your specular, you'll want to have that turned on as well. And usually you're not going to want to have this dull specular that comes by the default. You'll want it to be a pretty tight little specular, because that's what's going to give you those harsh white lines in the areas that you're looking for that. So play around a little bit with the incline of that. If you do want to give this just a little bit more kind of happening in this area here, making that look just a little bit softer, you can pull that fall off up a little bit, and that will help to make that difference. Now you can sit there and edit this just basic material all day long, and it's never going to really look quite as good as if you use a shader that has some more options for you. So let's quickly go in and start looking at a shader that we can use for this. So I'm going to go down to create, go to shader, and I'm going to choose that first one there, the Bonji. And you can see that this looks like glass. So already we're more in the ballpark of clear plastic than we were before. And I'm going to go ahead and drop this on to the two places that I have this material in my scene. And then we can start to edit it. So it's going to get crazy because we haven't changed anything yet. So let's just go ahead and get in there and start editing. Now, for me, I don't want any diffuse. Just like I told you before, I don't want this to have any kind of color just being attributed to it for really no reason. I want this to be clear. So I'm going to turn off the checkbox on the diffuse, and that's going to help quite a bit to take away any unnecessary color. We also have way too much refraction. This looks like it's underwater basically now. So that's going to be controlled inside of my transparency channel. So let's go in there, and of course you can see the refraction index is turned up to 1.5. So I'm going to put that at 1.001, and that's going to give it a little bit of refraction, but only enough to slightly distort the words here and not enough to make this crazy distortion we have over here on the side. Now let's start looking at our speculars. So they are turned up pretty high, and that's kind of what I'm seeing up here in the edge. So I'm going to turn that first one down to about 80. Specular 2, instead of having it be pure white, let's try just kind of making it a little bit more subtle with a gray and taking it from 20 to 10%. That's really going to help that. And then for this specular, I think we can stick with this darker color, but let's take this down even further to a 5%. So we're coming in here, we're making these changes and really helping this to become a more subtle texture for us instead of having, you know, just all of this crazy shininess to it that just does not look realistic. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now, my opacity, as far as the opacity, or excuse me, transparency, I think this looks pretty good. It looks very transparent. So I'm going to stick with that for now and the change to the refraction index. In our reflections, we could go in and start to change the intensity of those a little bit, but I would want it to be subtle because I'm pretty happy with the way that these reflections are looking. So before I go in and really start editing that, you can see we are getting more definition in this area that is extruded, but I can make that even more prevalent by turning on, again, the anisotropy attribute, just like we did for our metal. So by checking that on, I'm going to come in here and change that from the shrink wrap to the planar. I'm choosing planar because this whole image is pretty flat, and that's going to really start to help me just make this go a little bit better with the image that we're using. And you can see that what we'll start to get are some really great highlights that just almost sort of create this line all the way down the side here, really pick up on the light that would kind of collect in this area here and sort of shoot that over to the side, just really, really helping this to feel more realistic. Let's go ahead and do a quick render to our picture viewer so we can see the difference here that we've created by making some of those changes. So I'm going to pause while we render this to the picture view, and we'll come back and take a look at it. Okay, that render finished up, and as you can see, a huge difference here from where we were at before. Whereas before this was kind of ill-defined and looked cloudy, now we've got some really nice, beautiful, clear plastic that has some really great reflections on it with just the tiniest amount of refraction, but it goes a long way as far as just a slight amount of distortion to add to that area there. And then we get some really beautiful sort of casting of this light over here onto the edge. So really, really great idea to use a special shader for things like this and just experiment with that. And so that's kind of what's giving us these really interesting highlights that we would not have been able to achieve otherwise. And we also have the option to change this projection from planar. You could try auto planar. That is going to give you a different look. Also, shrink wrap is going to give you a slightly different look. So none of them are necessarily wrong unless you start getting into radial. That would not work for an object just like this one. But experiment with these three and see which one you like the best. They're all going to give you slightly different looking results. Okay, so that's it for our reflections in our clear objects. Let's move on to our next lesson, where we'll be talking about sticking textures to our objects in special situations. Procedural textures may not be working out so well for you. So we're going to talk about how to overcome that issue in the next lesson.